Okay, let's talk a little bit about one of the primary ways I like to use Origin, and that's template making. Of course, if I'm prototyping something, I can take Origin and go directly to the material and cut those few parts out. But as soon as I want to make multiples of that part, really for me, I want to make a template. So let's talk a little bit about template making when it comes to making chairs. Obviously with chairs, you need to make a lot of multiples of curved parts. And so you really need to be able to make a template. So for me, Origin really works perfectly for making a template so that I can make multiples of those parts. So here's an example of the template actually attached to the rough component for the back leg. And this is generally what you think of whenever you think of a template. It's the full one-piece template. It represents the entire part. And those can work really well, especially for larger pieces like this. And of course, making a really accurate template is important. That's one of the primary uses for Origin for me, and that's what I love about it. I can make that template perfect and really in a short period of time. And of course, if I'm working on a design and I want to tweak it a little bit, really easy to jump back into like whatever my 3D modeling software is, tweak the design, create a new template. 20 minutes later, I got a new one to work with. Yeah, those are your one-piece templates. You can see that's the final part there. You can even utilize this template for setups when it comes to machining the mortises and so forth if you want to. All right, let's kind of take a look at two-piece templates is maybe the way you can say it, or two-process templates. So for instance, our backrest here, these we're making in our project. They're actually pieces that are glued up and laminated together, so they're smaller little strips. We would lay those out on a board like this and cut them out. Now, if I have this little component that's the shape of this, and I try to template route that can be a little bit sketchy, to say the least. You can do it, but there's really better ways of approaching it, especially when you need to make a bunch of them, which you would if you were making a whole set of this chair. So what's one way of doing that? These two-part templates, two-process templates here. So what this allows me to do is use this template to trace it out onto my component, onto my wood rather, and then I can take those, bandsaw that out, leaving it slightly oversized. I like to usually leave it oversized about 1/16 of an inch all the way around, or 3/32, so somewhere around 2 millimeters if that helps. Okay, so I rough out that part, and one side of my template allows me to put the roughed out part in and machine one side of it nice and flat. Then I can take that part out, I can switch it to the other side of my template. Now I'm taking that machined surface, placing it against my reference here, locking that down. Now I can flush trim route the opposite side that is still rough. Now at that point, I have both sides of it roughed. In fact, in this particular one, it allows me in the first stage to cut it to the appropriate length, clean up one side, finish off the other side. So now I actually have 3 faces completed. So when I bring it to this side, pop it in, I'm just cleaning up, flush trim routing that remaining side. So then I have a complete part. And as you can see, with those all locked down, it's nice and secure. I can hold this template here. It's very secure whenever I'm doing the machining. Much more secure than trying to, say, double-sided tape this to a little part and then flush trim route that. As you can see, there's a big difference in that, not only in speed, but in safety as well. So those are the two primary ways I'm generally making templates. And yeah, Origin allows me to make all these parts and align them perfectly. Whereas if I was just trying to do this manually, it might take me a very long time. Okay, let's talk a little bit about fixtures. So when we're doing templates, right, that's something that we're shaping directly to the part to that exact size. Where fixtures come in, sometimes we need to be able to hold the parts that we've made because they're otherwise difficult to grasp. So a fixture can allow us to mount a component like our backrest here so that we can then trim it or mortise it or whatever we want to do. In this instance, we want to be able to mortise the end of our backrest. So this has got a curve here, these surfaces that match the inside radius that we template routed our components to. Once we had cut our parts out, we stack them together, we glue them up, we clean up those surfaces. Now we can mount it on our fixture here, and this allows us to then clamp it into the workstation. We have some nice reference points on this backrest, right? The flats here, those are nice, right? We could mount that to workstation. But imagine trying to clamp that with just those little surfaces. So the fixture becomes really important for us to be able to clamp it securely. That's when it comes into play. And what I'll do is I'll put a couple pieces of double-sided tape so that can pop on. I can align it, and then I can take that, pop it into Workstation, clamp it down, and then I can do my gridding off of that, and then go ahead and mortise for my mortises there, okay? So fixtures are an important aspect of making chairs in our shop, and of course Origin really helps us do that very accurately. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a moment and show how we cut these templates out of some 1/2" MDF with Origin. Okay, so one of the things that I often do is I don't cut full depth or worry about placing tabs or anything like that. I'll just cut very close to the final depth. This is a little bit more material than I would normally leave. Usually I would go for about 2/1000 or so, get really close. Then I know it's still locked in place. Go ahead and trim it out. And of course with this setup, it's gonna be used at the template router anyway, so I can very easily flush all that up at my router table. And that just saves me a little bit of trouble, and I don't have to worry about cutting through into my workbench. And now we're gonna utilize a pattern. This is the pattern for building up our backrest. And I say build it up because we're actually going to cut out 5 pieces, turn them on edge, they will stack together, and we glue them into one larger component. And so you might be wondering, why aren't we just cutting this out of one solid piece of wood? You absolutely could do that. You could bandsaw a nice tall piece out and maybe try to flush template route this or something like that. But this is a really tall section to try to flush template route or to clean up consistently from just cutting out on a bandsaw. So I don't even have the machines that really allow me to do that. And what we're really utilizing is the same thickness material that we're using throughout our build. That's one of the nice things about this build. All of it is the same thickness. So if we just simply take our same material, lay this out, we'll lay out 5 components, as we said. We'll be able to flip them up like that, stack them together, glue them, and we have our backrest. Okay, so one of the ways that will help us to be able to get a nice uniform looking backrest once we do that, we want to try to achieve a piece where it feels very uniform. We don't see this stark contrast between the layers. We can do that by choosing a piece that's wide enough that we can cut them all out of. If we have something that's about 7 or so inches wide, that should be able to make it possible for us to do it. We're always going to have some wood that maybe has a little slight curve to it or something like that with the grain, and that might be a perfect place to use those portions for this backrest because we have a curve. What better to follow that curve as we're routing it, and then it kind of travels along the shape of our backrest. So that's what I've done here. This has like a slight little curve, so I'm gonna orient my piece this way, and as you can see, I've got it a little bit angled because that's following the grain. So I've marked out my first piece. I'm just holding it down. I will mark it out, and then give myself about 1/8 of an inch or so space between the next layer. That'll be enough for me to get my bandsaw blade through there and give myself a little bit of a rough overage. I like to use a pencil when marking out my patterns that's a somewhat thick tip, because once I cut up close to that line, it gives me the approximate overage that I'm hoping to have a little extra overage, right? Because we're going to flush template route that overage away. And as you can see, I'm actually marked a line here, so I'm butting them all up against that line. Not super critical, but this is one way that when we stack our layers together and we glue them up, that pattern flows together nicely. And this is a mechanical pencil with a 2mm thick lead in it, if you're curious what I'm using there. Like those, they're pretty robust. And for this instance, it's perfect, right? And as you notice, I'm moving my hand along here because it's fairly thin, and if I'm not supporting right where I'm marking, I can easily kind of flex, right? If I was out here and I was pushing against it, you see how that moves. So I like to stay nice and close. We want each one of these to be nice and consistent in shape. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and number these so that when we flip them, after we bandsaw them out, we can keep them in the same order when we stack them back together. And I noticed that I didn't mark the end of one of these. Let's go and get my end mark. All right, okay, so 2, 3, 4, 5. And with all these little things together, you might just put a little X between the section that you know is the material we're removing versus what we're keeping, okay? Okay, so next we're gonna bandsaw these out, and then we'll take those over to the router table, and we'll use that 2-process template that we made with Origin. Here is our 2-process template here that we made with Origin. Now we're gonna be actually template routing our backrest components that we have bandsawed out. To identify which side you start with, it's gonna be the side that looks narrower because we're gonna be cutting those 3 sides, like the end, this portion, and then the end grain there. And then we'll flip around and we'll just be cutting that 4th side. So one of the things I might point out here that helps keep this piece really secured is I like to put a couple of pin spots here, or little holes where I can place a nail in, like just like a little finish nail, flip it up so the point is up. And so then when I press these down, this locks it down in there. It has a little something that really holds it so it doesn't want to slip. Sometimes people use sandpaper, such like that, but this is far more secure. And in this instance, putting that little mark on that surface isn't gonna matter because it's gonna be glued on that side anyway. Okay, so how we are gonna be using this, I'll just show with the part off, is we will be coming in to the end grain here, coming across, and always holding it nice and smooth, coming all the way around, and then finishing off with our end grain there. You'll notice this is a spiral router bit. It doesn't have a straight cutter. If we're using one with just a straight cutter or maybe a mild shear on the cutter, we might find that we're gonna have some tear out. We might have to leave very, very minimal hangover. This bit though cuts really efficiently, really effectively, so you can get away with a little bit more hanging over and it should be able to cut it off without giving you any massive tear out. But you'll know if it's too much and if you need to dial it back, so you might just have to play with it there. Start with less, and then if you feel comfortable with having a little bit more and need it, then by all means, use your good judgment there. This particular bit, there's a couple of different people that make this style and size. One is made by Whiteside. This particular one I have in here is made by Amana. I really like the Whiteside ones. They seem to be just even a little sweeter, but they're all quite good and definitely effective. Really, for this style, I only need the bottom bearing. This just happens to have the top bearing. I'm not going to utilize it, but it's there, so I'm just going to leave it on, and it doesn't interfere with the height of my material. Okay, let's get this mounted on. So I'm just going to see that I have a little bit hanging over either side. I'm going to bring this all the way up flush, and then I'm going to press it down. I'm going to make sure that it goes down onto those pins nicely. You can flip it over and kind of check, make sure that you're hanging over a little bit, and then we'll start doing our routing. Okay, something else that's worth pointing out, oftentimes gets overlooked, is the speed that you want your bit to be operating at. The tendency is we look at that max speed, maybe it says 18,000 RPMs, and we go, oh, okay, I'm gonna dial my router speed to 18,000 RPMs. That is really not the guide for what this bit will run ideally at. That's just saying the maximum. So I like to dial my speed down much lower. You get too slow, it gets a little too grabby. But at a slower rate, you're gonna find that there's kind of a sweet point where it feels really nice and balanced and it's cutting smoothly. So I might be at 12,000 RPMs, maybe 14, somewhere in there. But again, oftentimes you can even kind of play with your speed up and down, and you can see where that vibration really kind of picks up and drops down. So just try to find that even spot and cut there. One clue that you're probably too fast for your feed speed is if you're getting some burning. So right, when I'm talking about feed speed, we're talking about how fast you're moving through. So pick a pace where you can move nice and comfortably and smoothly. It's cutting, the bit's not moving so fast that it's burning because you're moving too slow. If you're getting any burning, either you need to dial the speed down or you need to clean your bit. But if it's a brand new bit and it's burning, then you're definitely got it too fast for the feed, for the pace that you're moving. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and cut this first side. I feel good about that. The end grain cuts cleanly. We have a nice smooth surface there, end grain there. So I feel good to flip it around to our other side. Take it. And literally this part comes off this way and moves over there. I've aligned those spots so that they should align with my previous little pin marks, nail marks, whatever you want to call them. Make sure that that's nice and seated firmly against this bearing surface. And these should be, if we built our template right, these should be nice and flush with the end of this component, this top surface component. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and follow the same process. Go ahead and start your bearing there, and we'll bring it into here, come on up, and off that end. Now, obviously going downhill, right, the grain, so we're going downhill on the grain. This is gonna cut very easily. When we get here, we will wanna be nice and firm and deliberate and smooth movements so that that cuts nice and cleanly. Again, if you have a good sharp bit that's spiral like this, you're probably gonna have no trouble, but just be attentive to that section as you cut. All right, let's get to cutting. That really looks ideal. That's what I want. Nice and smooth. So now we just need to cut 4 more parts so that we can stack them up and get our backrest glued up. All right, so one more tip that I think is pretty critical when it comes to being able to route these successfully is thinking for a moment about our grain orientation. Of course, we selected a board that kind of optimizing that little curve of the grain already so that it flowed with the shape of the backrest. But if you notice, take a look here, the way I put it onto our routing template, and this one is already completed, but it becomes pretty easy to see the grain orientation. The router bit is coming down this direction and this way out. So we have more like a steep grain oriented this way so that we're going down. So that's an easy cut. And then the section that's going more in alignment with the grain is when we're going that uphill cut, and that's the point at which you're more likely to have a blowout. So I'm just orienting it so that I'm not going into this steep grain, right? So to make this real clear, I could have had it oriented this way. So I'm coming down here now, when I'm coming into this, we got a lot of grain sticking out, and I would just be more likely to have some blowout there. So just take a look at your piece and say which one optimizes my grain orientation so that I have the best possibility for success. Okay, so let's kind of wrap our heads around the parts that we've cut out and that we've routed and how we're going to fit those together. So if you recall, let's take these back to the position we had them in our board. Actually, these are flipped this way. That'll make a little more sense for us. And if I turn them around, then you can see the numbers that we wrote on there. So we laid out our pattern, marked it out, we bandsawed those out, we then routed them. So we have our final pieces here, and we have them numbered. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is gonna help us to do what we might call the rip and flip, except we routed and flipped. So we're gonna flip these like this, right? Okay. And now if you can take a look at that grain, see? It's got a nice pleasing flow, and once we glue that up, it won't be very easy to discern that was actually cut out and flipped like that and laminated together. Almost looks like we cut it out of one solid piece of wood, which is nice. Okay, so now we want to glue this together, and this is a little bit tricky about how we want to align it. It's actually pretty simple, but I'll show you my approach to this. Basically, I'm going to use my tail vise to clamp a couple boards on the end so that everything is now parallel, and then we're going to grab some clamps on it like that. So I'm using my tail vise and just a bench dog here, and I'm going to get these in here and try to align the pressure close to the center so it keeps everything parallel. And for me to do that, I kind of have to move these two close to the edge of my bench, which not too bad. I just might drop one. Okay, and then just bring them together. And you don't need a lot of pressure. We're not trying to like exert a ton of pressure because then we got everything distorted and bent out of shape. We're really just using this in pressure just to be enough to keep all the ends in alignment, right? Okay, and then we still have to put glue on, that just kind of gives you an idea. And then we'll bring our clamps over and put our bar clamps on like that. You can use parallel clamps or whatever clamp is really appropriate. That part is not super technical. So let's just go ahead and spread our glue on. And I don't use any particularly fancy method. Just take our glue bottle, get us some glue on here, and in these instances I don't bother with gluing both sides. I just do one side of our glue up. But if that were true, then I would have skipped this one. So let's just take a quick clean off of that glue. All right, so we'll spread these. One of my favorite ways to actually put glue on for laminates, especially like veneered laminates, is using like a foam roller. But whenever I'm just doing one little glue up like this, we'll just brush it on. And yeah, as long as you get good glue coverage on at least one side of the glue up, you're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine. Just make sure everything is covered. That's one nice thing about the foam rollers, is they give nice, good, even distribution. Yeah, okay, I'm just making sure spots there, a little gap that I got. Okay, we should be good to go there. All right, make sure that we're keeping them in the same order. Shouldn't be too difficult. Okay, this. A little pressure. Not too much, because we want to be able to move them together. One tip about putting on clamps is, and when you're still trying to align your laminations, don't apply a ton of pressure, just a little bit. And then you can still move everything around. I feel like our temptation is to throw on a clamp and just put all the pressure on it we can. We can apply more pressure later once we get everything aligned if we see the need. But yeah, just enough. You also got to give it a second to kind of push the glue, to move that glue, right? It's kind of thick, so just a little pressure. All right, see, I can still align everything. Because it's a lot easier to take your time and align things than it is to go back and have to remove a lot of material to get it all to line up. So a careful glue up saves you time later in your woodworking process. Don't get in too much of a rush. It's hard to tell yourself that, because it only takes one bad glue up to give you that glue up PTSD sort of feeling of everything's got to go fast. But take some long breaths, slow down. It's gonna be fine. And then, in all truth, we could probably be fine with the amount of clamps we had right there. I tend to just like to put some on the opposite side to sort of balance out that pressure a little bit. Always makes me feel like I'm gonna have a little better results. And then once I get those clamps on, sometimes I'll reposition my other ones a little bit to kind of get them a little bit more centered. All right, so we'll just leave that for probably at least about an hour. Usually with this type of glue, about 4 hours is quite good. They get solidly dried off before you start processing it. Even better if you can leave it till the next day. Yeah, and that's it. So now all we need to do, once this is all glued up, is we'll clean off the surfaces, card scraper, sandpaper, and so forth. We will cut this to width, cut it to length, and then we're ready to jump over to our workstation and put our mortises in. So now we want to go ahead and mount our backrest to our fixture. So that's going to give us the right alignment. So when we place it on workstation, we can cut our mortises into the backrest. We're going to try to keep this as simple as possible, and really that's just some double-sided tape. You know, none of the placement is probably all that critical, just getting enough on so that it's holding the piece and it's not falling off of the fixture when we're placing the clamps on. So this is honestly probably more than enough right here, but I'll do a couple more little strips there. And since I think we have enough, I'll go ahead and cut those in half even. Place those here. The things I like to do with my scissors is just use the back side of it to give it a little press, get that side stuck. Okay. Hopefully I can get this side off. Usually in that process of pressing it down with the scissors, kind of rolls up an edge for me too. All right, and now to get these aligned, kind of find just standing them both on edge here. I feel like I can trust my eyes for centering it if it's ever so slightly overhanging on one side or the other. Okay, and a little pressure on these tapes help them to stick, so I'm going to use this clamp to just give it a little pressure there. And this is just getting that tape to stick. I like those little squeeze clamps, because they certainly give enough. And just because I like being a little extra secure, we'll do both sides of them here. Again, we really just need it to hold the backrest onto the fixture until we get it clamped on workstation. And from there, we should be good to go. Okay, let's clean up a little bit what we have here as we go. That over there. Okay, so now we'll mount this to workstation and we'll go and cut our mortises. So what I'm gonna do quick right here is just make a little quick measurement. I wanna know what my distance is from this surface, because this is gonna be registering against the face of my workstation up to the edge here. So I might need to be able to make like a little offset adjustment to my pattern to make sure I'm aligning as close as possible. And it looks like I'm a 1/2 inch plus a 32nd, right? So about 17 32seconds. So generally have these gridded out at about 1/2 inch, so we can just adjust our pattern about a 32nd of an inch back from where we place our grid on workstation. So I'll be gridding against the front of this, and then I'll be utilizing the pin as my side reference. So we'll go ahead and mount that on there, grid here, and then there will be my side reference. Okay, let's get this clamped on. Okay, so to kind of keep us all on track is what we're doing. We're cutting mortises into the end of the backrest. So here's our leg, and as we see, there's mortises here. So we'll have a floating tenon, like a domino, right? It's what we called dominoes before there was a domino. We called them floating tenons. So a few of those go in there, and then the backrest will slip over that. So we're cutting the mortises on the end of that backrest. So let's just go ahead and cut those. So once this whole back assembly is glued up, I would pop this in the vise, something like this, and then just with a little block plane just at askew. Just go ahead and clean that up, flush that up nicely. Once I got that, I like to take a little triangular file and kind of define the joint. I feel like that kind of eases this wood movement transition over time and just kind of carries that sort of element throughout the piece, where the divisions between elements are a little bit actually intentionally defined. I just like the look of that. Of course, that may not be your style, you know, blend it all together if you want. Okay, so as you can see, this aspect of the build really gave me an opportunity to highlight how I use Origin for making templates and for fixtures. Clearly, this is just some floating tenons here. You could do that with a domino, but this is the only instance on this chair where I'm actually using floating tenons. Really, Origin really excels at making these more complex mortise and tenon joints, which you're gonna see throughout. They're integral tenons, and especially for this back rail here, you really could not get away with using a domino. And the beautiful thing about these tenons that we can cut here, they're really complex, they're really close, and there's not an effective way to make these without doing them on a CNC. So here we get to use Workstation, Origin to cut some of these really complex, fine mortise and tenon joints that really, yeah, you have to have a CNC to really productively make them.